Moving forward, our first panel discussion of the day in design thinking as an effective toolkit for innovation in a built environment. We're looking forward for a very interactive session here, which we'll open for an audience interaction as well. But I'd like to invite on stage our moderator of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to present to you Mr. R. Subramanian, Managing Director, Saint-Gobain, India, Class Business. Let's put our hands together for the man who from the inception of Saint-Gobain has pioneered the vision of achieving green buildings through design, manufacturing and distribution. All this has been under his leadership and more. Thank you so very much for joining us, sir. And as he takes a seat, I'd like to invite on stage our panelists. Let's put our hands together as I welcome Mr. Nitin Gupta, Partner and Director, Arcop Associates. Mr. Gupta has played various roles in planning, design, construction in the areas of interior, building design and planning of multiple projects. We just had tea, so I wonder where the energy is. Let's really put our hands together for all our panelists. We have with us the very charming Ms. Sonali, Bhagwati, President DPA. She has been published as one of the 20 best architects of India in the book Reflections. Thank you for joining us, ma'am. We also have with us Ms. Parvesh Sharma, Managing Director, Design and Construction, Tishman, Speyer. Let's put our hands together for the man who holds a 20 years experience in real estate, project management and more. I'd also like to invite on stage Mr. D. Vishwanathan, Director, Design and Projects, RSP Design Consultants India. Let's put our hands together as he joins us with 21 years of rich experience in leading practices in Kuwait and India. I'd also like to mention here that in the panel we were supposed to have Ms. Sheila Sriprakash, Founder and Chief Architectural Architects, but she couldn't join us because of the Chennai rains. Of course, she passes on her best wishes to the panel. All yours, sir.
Thank you. Friends, design thinking is an effective toolkit for innovation in built environment. So that's the panel discussion on. So three aspects really. One part of it is design thinking. The second anchor point is really innovation in the built environment. And in the context of the summit, smart green, so sustainability. So design thinking, as all of you know, increasing in popularity, human centricity, not the traditional analytical way of thinking, but divergent and convergent thinking, with a lot of emphasis on prototype and testing. So three aspects, which I hope we are able to bring out in today's panel discussion. The human aspect, what is desired. The technology aspect, what is feasible, and the business aspect, what is viable. These are the three questions which design thinking seeks to answer in the process of finding solutions for what is complex problems, the hairy, wicked problems as they are called, like sustainability in built environment. Sustainability has many facets. The panel, we have decided to focus on where the last speaker left us with. He called it personal space. We are calling it public domain. So we will focus on not the buildings, but the public domain. If the city were a white sheet of paper and the black outlines are the buildings, this is the space between the black outlines of neglected area and an area where there is not much of control. The buildings, there is control, the designer has control, the builder has control, the user has control. Public domain, who has control is not very clear. What needs to be done, who should do it, what can be done. This is the topic that we propose to tackle in the panel discussion. More a journey than a panel discussion, and helping us to guide us along the journey really. I have got a distinguished set of panelists with me. They bring many years of experience and expertise I'm sure in the next hour or so, they'll be sharing a lot from their experience in terms of insights, in terms of perspectives, in terms of maybe even solutions for the problems of public domain. A quick introduction. Sonali, Bhagwati, more than 3 decades of experience, passed out of CEPT in 1986, co-founder of Speyer Design, president of DPA. Apart from being an architect and a designer passionate about sustainability, one of the 3 members in the Delhi Urban Arts Commission, an active member in Delhi Conservation Society, Heritage Walks in Kashmiri Gate, member of the Committee for Review of Building Bylaws of Delhi. I bring those aspects of your experience to the front so that I hope you will be able to share with us some experiences from that on public domain. I have next to her Mr. Vishwanathan, D. Vishwanathan, more than 2 decades of experience working in India and abroad, architect with RSP, commercial projects, housing projects, educational and so on, worked on a master planning of embellishments in Cyberabad over 2,500 acres. Interesting experience that. Nitin Gupta, architect, more than 20 years of experience, worked in India and abroad, trendsetter in high rises in Gurgaon. So that's an interesting piece I picked up from his experience, and I hope we get to hear something on that. So, 3 people from the architectural and design domain, and we have a minority from Mr. Parvesh Sharma, project management. I hope you bring out the developer perspective on design. Rich experience over 2 decades, again IT, ITES, mixed use buildings, India, abroad, and so on and so forth. So we have, as I said, a panel rich in experience, and the way we will do it is we will have the panel discussion for 40-45 minutes, and then we will give you time for questions. So do jot down the queries which come to your mind and the questions which arise during the course of the panel discussion. We will try to take as many questions as we can. So setting the ball rolling, I'll start off with I'll start off with Sonali, public domain and sustainability. Not very popular, is it?
Well, thank you for sort of handing over to me. According to me, sustainability is an aspect which permeates all aspects of our lives. And public domain is one aspect which controls or should be controlling a huge part of the quality of life that we live in our cities. And that's the reason why I feel that it needs to be addressed and people need to start thinking about it. We all live in our little oases, whether be our house or our offices or our workplace, shopping, clubs, entertainment centers. So these are all our controlled oases, which are our controlled built forms. But the spaces in between that actually connect all these little oases is where the actual public domain is. We normally try to spend the way things are today. We try and spend as little time in this public domain as possible. We are always in a hurry to cross it at the earliest and reach our destination, which is another oasis. But because there is no joy in this public domain anymore, it's really like a chore, a torture sometimes to be traversing through the public domain. And that's something that needs to be looked at, because according to me, that affects a considerable amount of this aspect of sustainability. It is this public domain really that hosts a lot of our public, community, social activities. It is this public domain that takes care of, let's say, our weekend markets, our parking, our taxi and auto stands, small shopping, all sorts of small services that we use day in and day out. These are the everything in our life is part of this public domain, which is not obviously inside our homes. And that's the reason why this public domain becomes extremely important. But since this public domain is sort of no man's land right now, what happens is that none of these activities are organized, none of these activities are designed or planned. They just come and occupy whatever space that is left in this public domain. I would say even our roads are just planned as roads. It's not the right of way which is designed. As a result, between the roads and the right of way, there is a huge bit of land which is just left unstructured. This unstructured piece of land becomes a home for all sorts of encroachments, all sorts of activities which are socially also required. We have community feeding, we have community activities like Durga Puja or any of these large festivals. They all happen in this public domain on public land. But how are they organized? How do people get there? How do people get out? What is the safety factor? How do they park? Where do they walk? None of these aspects are really designed. And that's the reason why I think the design of the public domain needs to be looked at carefully, where it actually recognizes all these social needs and make sure that as a part of a zonal plan, all these are actually incorporated. You need NMVs, they should be incorporated. You need autos, they should be incorporated. You need small services like cobblers and florists and carpenters and electricians, they need to have a place. They cannot rent spaces in markets. It's not possible. You have to recognize and be realistic about these things and make sure that these aspects are integrated into the public domain. Today what is happening is none of these aspects are integrated. They all come haphazardly into our roads and our pavements, and all these areas are taken up without any control. And this causes actually all the traffic problems. It is not really a road width that is causing the problem. Most of our roads are designed adequately, they have a proper structure, but because none of these structures are left intact, they are completely taken over by these services. That is why we have the problems that we have. That is why we have the congestion that we are having. And that is one of the reasons why, which is adding significantly to the pollution in this city. So a design of a good design of the public domain, which takes care of all these activities and places them and controls them, could lead to a really smooth passage and a good quality of life. It would obviously, first of all, encourage the pedestrian. Now today a pedestrian is completely lost. We need to bring back not only a pedestrian, which is an able-bodied person, we need to create spaces for the elderly, the children, the differently abled, and make sure that we give them seamless passage within our public domain to go from A to B. And these are the aspects that we need to integrate and make sure that our public domain works.
Thank you. I'll take it from there. Nitin, 2 or 3 points which I jotted down: encroachments, small services integration, transport integration, really integration of the public domain into the built space. Is it easier in new cities than old cities? Is it easier in Gurgaon than Delhi?
Fundamentally, of course, it is easier to plan. Then comes the big question about execution and implementation of the scheme. For sure, cities which have one nodal authority, which is, it could be Gurgaon or it could be Greater Noida, they are much easier to implement situations in the urban scenario. But for example, Delhi, where there are multiple authorities taking care of the urban environment, the job becomes a little more difficult. So for sure, it is easier to implement in a situation like Gurgaon or Greater Noida.
Yeah, I take the ball to you, and so it's the message from Nitin is designing is easy. Not sure if the implementation is
Is also easy, but easier than, let's say, a case like Delhi.
It's easier.
Yeah, it's easier.
So, your experience, India and abroad, integrating the public domain into design.
Yeah, I'll take from what Nitin said about design being easy. It is, we believe it is easy, but I think there's more to it than just that. As examples, when we do a lot of these mixed-use projects, one of the things that we look at is funnily role play in order to validate whether the design is actually correct or what we're doing is right. When I say role play, obviously when you design for a mixed-use development and you design the public realm, you're designing for multiple user profiles. So there are people who are going to be living there, there are people who are going to be working there, or casual people who've come to visit. So what we try to do is validate schemes by role play, wherein individuals begin to take the role of that particular user profile and commute this entire space from where they get off their vehicle onto their place of work or whatever they tend to do. And you realize that the design of that public domain is not easy because often some of these areas overlap. Very often the user profile actually do not overlap, and you really have to work out a different strategy every time. So for example, you got to have the garbage cleared up, and you got to get people also into that space. So both these activities do happen at various times, but they happen in the same space. So taking on design, yes, it's a critical element. It's probably one of the easier things to do. Implementation, I think we have to look at how private and the government agencies come together on this. There are examples abroad where the zones, which are so-called the zones between buildings, become responsibility of the developer or the private agency which is developing the land. And in some ways, that accountability of that space therefore increases rather than leaving it to the government agencies to do that. That's one way how I believe the private and the public can really participate. Multiplicity of authorities in our government sector is a big problem, and including places like Gurgaon, much easier than Delhi. But even in Gurgaon, I mean, just as recent as a week ago, traffic signals, funnily, are maintained by 3 different agencies in 3 different areas. The technology is there, but they maintain, different agencies maintain. So, and one agency actually does not talk to the other agency. So you get these traffic, getting all collected in one zone. So that has to go. Somewhere the duplicity of different agencies coming together has to go. But just from the point of view of these gray spaces that we are talking about, the public domain, I think from a sustainable point of view, there are, in my opinion, 3 aspects to it, and that can actually take this discussion further. One is the social aspect of it. It's got to be sustainable for the people. Environment and finance is probably the next one, but social is probably most important. And by that, I'll take what Sonali said. It must be inclusive. It must be accessible to people with different abilities, and it must be accessible to people with different social strata or financial strata. And then, of course, it has to be economical in the sense that financially viable, which you're going to take up, as well as environmentally sensitive. So I think the duplicity of organization in our authority needs to go, and somewhere developers have to be empowered to feel more accountable towards all these spaces that are just outside their realm of or boundary lines, which invariably most of us design in actually, and very difficult to get out of that boundary line. So I think it goes to Parvesh from here straight away.
Parvesh, Vishwa is just setting the stage for you. The developers have to do more. How would you like to take it from there?
No, definitely. I think, as you mentioned in the introduction, my view will be slightly different because from a developer perspective, I'll be stating a few things. Before we get into that, as Sonali rightly pointed out, no man's land of the public domain. Let me take a step back on this thing and just getting back to some of my prior experience on dealing with this public domain spaces. And I'll get back to DB's point on developers' ownership on these areas. So one of the MOEF meeting, the panel asked me the question. We were putting a design for a very large IT space, 25,000 people to be seated in that complex plot area of about 16 acres. So highly dense populated development which we are going to undertake it. And the panelists asked me that how you are going to manage the traffic outside your campus. So I was really taken aback, and I told, sir, with due all respect to you, we expect the government to provide me the infrastructure for the traffic and everything for that one. I am just a developer. I will plan my thing within my campus. I don't know what is your traffic plans for outside the campus. So, I think that meeting left there, and we were able to convince the panelists at that point of time. But the latest design which we have been carrying out, and my particular experience is dealing again with some always 20,000 plus of campuses. So we have seen that no man's land is always a no man's land. Means you talk to authorities, they said, okay, now they have bring the infrastructure up to this point, and your plot boundary starts from here. This is a space in between which is nobody is responsible for that. We started looking at it differently. We started looking at it. I'll come to DB's point from the ownership as a developer, which we took it. We engaged with a traffic consultant to review how many ingress, egress points are required. But the brief went beyond that point. We asked him to look at that how that in the nearby area, how the traffic is going to move into our campus. And let's look at that. And that's where we started interacting with the authorities there. We started collaborating with them. We started looking at the road width. We started looking at the flow of the traffic into our campus. And we started advising the authorities that, okay, these are the bottleneck points which authorities needs to address. And I think the authorities was a bit receptive on that one initially. And then slowly and steadily, when we started putting more emphasis on these points, they started looking at it more seriously on that. And it really helped. We started asking them, you put a bus stop in front of our campus. We will maintain that space. We will extend our boundaries slightly outside without taking an ownership, but we'll maintain those spaces. So we provided a good space. It's not our land, but that was a land which was available in front of our plot. We converted into a nice bus station there, which runs the bus services to all across the city now. And that reduces the transportation problem, that reduces the traffic problem. The second point on the developer ownership on certain area is that when we design our campus, we not had looked into our plot of 12 acres or 16 acres. We have seen the natural drains in that area. And Hyderabad, Chennai, these areas are typically having a lot of these natural drains, which in due course of construction get obstructed by the building developments, and nobody looks at that area, that how that natural drains are leading to some ponding points, how it is getting impacted. So we also started looking at those areas that my building point is the lowest in that surroundings. So I know that that area will get inundated in the times of the rains. So how I'm going to lead that the volume of water which is supposed to come in that plot, it has to be diverted in a proper manner to another area. So we started designing the stormwater drains around our plot, just looking into that how it will impact the bigger picture, not only impacting our campus. And that really helped. Means the government again has been receptive on those areas, and they had advised us, okay, you can take the drains and lead it to this lakes. Means Hyderabad is typically having a lot of lakes out there, so you can drain this water into the lakes, apart from doing our natural water harvesting systems, rainwater harvest, so which we have done it. So I think from my side, these are the 2 points which I wanted to put it forward, and this is especially from a large campus environment, and it really worked very well.
Sure. If you allow, I would like to add to, yeah, sure. Yeah, very rightly said. In fact, something that I would like to bring out, is we have been studying the new norms that have been laid for the planning of the TOD developments for Delhi, and someone has very sensitively looked at this whole scenario. Now let's just go back. Let's say why this whole design of gated communities or gated secured office complexes came in. It is primarily because of the security situation in India, where you want to shut yourselves in,
right?
Worried about the security and safety of the residents inside or of the workers inside. That is what creates a problem, that we start building these heavy boundary walls, which physically cut you off. In this regard, in fact, it is quite interesting the way the new norms for the TOD developments have been framed for Delhi, wherein they are heavily discouraging, the creation of boundary walls. In fact, to the extent that you are not allowed, In fact, along the road, almost 75% of the road edge has to be made active. So thereby you are allowed a mixed use development, which is another issue with respect to some of the planning norms, traditional planning norms, where either it is a residential complex or a commercial complex. So obviously allowing mixed use, putting commercial edge on the front of the road, making 75% is their norm, minimum. You can do 100%. So idea is very simple. They say it's called eyes on the street. That if you have someone looking on the street all the time, that itself brings in a security. So for sure these, there are maybe sometimes very simple solutions required to a complicated problem, like, when you secure your own compound, there's a high boundary wall created, and then obviously nobody wants to take care of the space outside the boundary wall. And that is where all the informal sector then starts developing along that. So from that point of view, there is an active thinking going on, and I think we should see this level of improvement in the, in the new transit-oriented developments in Delhi.
If I can add to that, like for example, Delhi is a city which does not have an urban edge as of now. It developed more as a suburban development. And now it's neither suburban nor urban, it's somewhere jammed in the middle. So I think these kind of radical changes are, I would say, down the line going to be absolutely necessary to create the urban fabric that a city needs for its vibrancy.
Okay, I want to take a slight sideways step. So we discussed so far about new built environment. So let's also look at our existing cities. There is heritage, there is space which is kind of crowded and struggling to cope with the demands of the new age, and there are slums. And so how do we look at the public domain? What would each of you say be the top two priorities in terms of getting the public domain as a focus area in existing cities, in living cities, Delhi proper instead of, say, Gurgaon?
I think first and foremost would be safety and security in my mind. If a public domain is not safe, it's just not going to be enough, whatever money you spend on that. The second most important thing would be access. I'll take an example of the so-called Mall Mile in Gurgaon, which personally I've been studying for a long time, at least for the past 3-4 years, as I've seen it grow into a complete chaos and mess with the metro station there. The MG Road in Gurgaon, of course, as soon as the metro came in, the access part of it was completely solved. So there is a lot more access for not just people who live in and around Gurgaon, but also as far away as Noida, even willing to travel all the way to Gurgaon. But just look at how that entire development has happened between the various public areas which are in front of all these different shopping malls and residential. In some sense, the MG Road is actually a mixed use because it has a lot of residential pockets in between all these different commercial development. But clearly there is a lack of vision of how all these can be brought together. Today, parking is the biggest problem there, and I think there has to be some radical thinking about how this parking issue is sorted out. My thought was that you completely make the basement parking in these buildings free, but charge much higher for parking on the road, and you would see that people automatically push the cars out of the public realm. It can be regained back for the public, and then create better access to these. There is a lot of green and public plazas, but they are at various levels. Each one of them is at a different level. There are boundary walls, there are barbed wire things, but there is great opportunity, I think, today, even in new cities like Gurgaon, which have over the period of time developed and started to acquire problems that existing cities already have, and in a much faster pace.
So Delhi, how do we get some part of the old city?
Yeah, I was thinking, in fact, so okay, let's just try and imagine ourselves, whether it is some of the affluent parts of South Delhi or West Delhi, any residential colony that we go to. Delhi is mostly plotted development. You try and walk from your house, from any house, to a local shopping center. That is where we'll understand the problem. You will invariably have to walk on the road because, first of all, the pavement or the pathway does not exist. Even if it exists, there are so many intermittent level breaks within the pathway that it is virtually impossible. You just have to keep hopping, one after another to walk, and then on top of it, you may have situations where, you may trip, it's unsafe to walk. Now, that is something actually, if you compare with the kind of environments that we are able to create, let me say inside a gated commercial complex or inside a gated residential complex, we are able to solve that problem because that is done in a holistic way. It is impossible now, in my opinion, to say that, the whole city were to be ripped apart and then pavements were to be laid fresh. Even if they were to be laid, somewhere or the other, MCD or some other implementing agency would not implement it. So, solution rather could be that, in a way, you involve public at large, involve the citizens. Let's say, not an accurate example, but the kind of movement that Rahagiri is, that, on weekends, citizens virtually convert certain areas of road into a pedestrian zone. So similar movement is we are able to create, wherein people start participating. At the end of the day, I have to make sure that the pavement in front of my house is good enough for someone to cross, in a safe manner. Then if these are interlinked and finally implemented in a sensitive manner, we can achieve a lot within an existing environment in Delhi. So these are some very small issues, but as an aggregate, they can have a great impact on the urban environment.
Why don't you think the skywalks in that kind of areas will be helpful, or it will not work in the Delhi environment?
Skywalks, sure, Parvesh, skywalk is a very good sort of solution, but it's kind of successful in a very dense environment. where it's always active. In fact, I have seen cases where some of these crossovers, the overbridge on the road, the pedestrian walkovers, after 10 o'clock at night, you have drug peddlers sitting there because they are no man's land, and some of our own junior colleagues have got mugged leaving home at leaving office late at night. So it's it's a kind of a fine balance that probably needs to be created. Skywalks are a great solution for very dense urban areas, let me say, where
because in Mumbai it has started working effectively.
Sure.
Initially people were not willing to take that route, but now it has started working effectively in a place like Mumbai.
Particularly access to the station.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, where it is for transit oriented development, where you're looking for a lot of commercial and the transport hubs coming together. There those solutions are pretty good.
You know what we have looked at, I mean, public domain is for public, for people, and people means essentially to begin with the pedestrians. So as an attempt to bring back the pedestrian, as an attempt to create a safe passageway for pedestrians, as a part of a DUAC initiative, we looked at a project which started as a rejuvenation of greens in Delhi. But as we started looking at the project, it developed into a beautiful green-based project. We figured that all the way from Tughlakabad Fort to City Fort, there must have been a huge green land which is now crisscrossed with roads and all sorts of things and fast-moving traffic. So as a result, most people don't even perceive the beautiful greens that are there in the surrounding. But if we look at taking these greens and creating and activating the entrance nodes which happen from various areas, and we start working out connecting nodes which connects one green chunk to another, let's say from Tughlakabad to the Jahanpana to the Panchsheel forest, we could work out with 3 or 4 connecting nodes development, a beautiful seamless walking and cycling track over let's say 10 kilometers. It takes you through a major part of South Delhi, and it would activate these beautiful forests because these forests are absolutely gorgeous, and unfortunately they are not used adequately. They're used for morning walks, sometimes a little bit of evening walks, little bit of winter play for the kids, but they are completely underused. They are beautiful chunks of green right in the heart of our cities, and this is just one forest. There are so many greens dotted all over our city. So if we looked at trying to create an alternative, start taking pedestrians through these green areas, activate them, as you have more people, they become safer, they become more attractive to go through. You could create nice, very, very pleasant walking environments for people to go from A to B. Another project that we looked at was in the Harinagar area, where there is the Tihar lake. That lake has completely dried. So the project sort of looked at a system where you could take all the rainwater and sewage treatment, do a lot of sewage treatment, and bring that water back into the lake and rejuvenate the lake. And there is a absolutely perfectly feasible way to do it. So the lake could be rejuvenated, you develop the gardens around it, and then you could actually start linking up these gardens with a little bit of overhead intervention. You could go all the way to Central Ridge. And once you go to Central Ridge, you could go to so many parts of the city. So if we actually start looking at creating and using our greens more effectively instead of just cordoning them off and locking them up, we could make them much, much more attractive and more integrated with the city.
Thank you, Sonali. I mean, there's a very nice bit of experience that you shared. One point which came up repeatedly is getting the community into the act. What is your experience in that? Examples which have worked, because at the end of the day, whether it's a new city, whether it's an old city, whatever we are talking about in terms of the public domain, it involves a fair amount of involvement of the community, awareness, empowerment, motivation for action. Any examples in
Well,
your experience which have worked?
In fact, I can give a very positive example. In that respect, I have a small neighborhood park in front of my house. And, you know, I've been experiencing it for last now almost 15 years, wherein I would say somewhere someone must have brought in this shift where the resident welfare association, which is predominantly controlled by the older generation, you know, who are retired government servants, or so they kind of adopted the neighborhood park, you know, and over this period, it's a huge improvement that, you know, we have seen, where obviously we also contribute in terms of money to the welfare association, but they are also able to generate funds from government, you know, for redevelopment of the park, for improvement of the park. There is some amount of fund that is given by the municipal corporation. And for sure, that's a very positive example where the community has got together and, you know, it's a beautiful environment has been created. Aesthetically, one could question, but still, you know, there are floodlights put in the park for
It's
environment
vibrant.
to be,
It's vibrant.
it's vibrant, you know, it's
Aesthetic
become safe, and yeah, it's becoming, I mean, I would say even from horticulture point of view, it's quite interesting and nice, you know, it's been developed over the year. In fact, just to add a funny angle to it, it's gone to another extent where the older generation doesn't allow kids to play at all in the park, you know, and that is becoming another point of, you know, tension and stress within the neighborhood. But still, it's a very positive example, and that's, I would say, all over Delhi, mostly wherein the neighborhood parks have developed well.
You know, one of the most, I mean, to me, the most pertinent example of how a public domain can really come about is the Ahmedabad riverfront development. Obviously, without the participation of the people of Ahmedabad, this would not have happened, because it involved people at many, many levels, many social levels, economical levels, political level. All it was a coming together of the entire community to make sure that this riverfront happened, and it's happened. It's a project on ground, and it's probably the best example to demonstrate how a public domain can be improved with people's participation.
Many of the people here would have seen the example of Gurgaon's Rahagiri, which is actually making. I was very actively participating in it in the first 1.5 years, while I used to sit close to the place where Rahagiri used to be held. Great event because really people captured the streets, and there's so much participation from the authorities side. I mean, you could actually go and shake hands with the police commissioner. His entire family would be on the street playing football or badminton or going through the whole fitness exercise. Now, to some, it would seem that this is a fairly elitist concept for all the elite who live in Gurgaon. But no, what was most interesting about these Rahagiri events were that the neighborhood villages, which are enclaves within this high-end residential development, you would find so many of those children actually dancing to the Zumba, which is actually held on the street. So it's a matter of creating the right environment and the right set of parameters for this to happen. And it will become inclusive. It is not exclusive. It cuts across all social strata. Yeah, you would have a lot of hoity-toity people with mats, you know, standing and doing their exercises in the most, you know, well-dressed manner. But you would also have all these street children enjoying the dance, enjoying the music. While the commissioner was around, they had also organized rock shows at 10:30 in the morning by famous artists right in the middle of the road. I think these are great events to capture. Now, what that tells you, however, is not the road that you need to capture. It means that there is a demand for a space like that. And that's what we are really looking for in the public domain. That is, nobody is saying that take away the cars and put people in it. But I think there is a demand for such spaces which are safe, secure. The moment the cars went away, 2-year-olds were cycling on the streets. And that's a very positive event for for a otherwise soulless place like Gurgaon, I mean, I would say is fairly soulless otherwise.
I think once we take care of all the social elements in the community, things become easy, which we generally tend to neglect when we do a gated developments. So you find that the gated development is all posh and nice, but you come out of the gated development, you will find all that there are street vendors, there are other things happening around in that area. So I think once we are designing, or I think the socially people are getting more aware about this, all sectors of the society which need to be addressed. I have seen it in some of the society, they have started, they understand this requirement that there is a vendor requirement or for a certain areas, which is as the society needs as the vendors need. So both they have to interact with each other. So they have started creating a space within the societies and allocate them space for a certain period of time, and he doesn't have to sit on the road. He just come inside your society and occupy a space which is probably not used for any other purpose. So, and that's a very good interaction, means you can, and that serves the larger society, that serves the smaller sector of the society, that serves the gated community which you are developing it. So I think the communities have started looking beyond their areas or the gated communities and started looking at the more social elements of that.
So, yeah, in fact, just to add, very often our design briefs are now carrying these, when they come to us as developers, that we want those spaces where melas can be held even within these enclaves. So it's part and parcel of how design briefs are now being formed for some of these residential development, where outside vendors come and display and have these street things. So it's good that way, because you then begin to think your design through and not just think in terms of creating a park or something, but creating spaces which are fit for certain activities which happen.
Okay, so the message seems to be there are enough examples that there is hope, and involvement of the community is definitely important, not just important but feasible. I'll touch upon one other topic, and I'll just run through all of you for your quick.
Just I want to add one thing, that for a lot of these initiatives to happen, what was mentioned earlier by him also is that this multiplicity of agencies in a city is what really creates so many problems. I have always been thinking that, like in all our projects, we have multiple vendors, multiple agencies coming together, and there is one project manager who integrates and manages them all. So why can't we as a city have a project manager? Why can't we have an agency which is an integrating agency which makes sure that everything comes together coherently? So I think this is one thing which I feel is important for this whole issue of public domain as well.
Which is a kind of counter to the town planning.
Yeah, but who integrates everybody?
Good. We are running short of time. So last point I want to quickly touch upon and then run. Community, involvement of community, very important. A contentious issue, particularly in the inner cities and when we talk about encroachments, slum rehabilitation. The government is involved, the community has to play a role, builders, developers have to play a role. So far the experience in India has been mixed.
Right.
Your take?
Yeah, of course. See, this SRA which has been started in Mumbai, the slum rehabilitation projects, we a lot of times keep evaluating these projects, and the biggest challenge is always the slum rehabilitation part. So there is always, you will find that within that slums there are a lot of people, they are representing the slums in the large. Dealing with them becomes really difficult at times because they come up with different requirements. So we generally enter into the project once the slum is rehabilitation process is over. Being an American developer, we don't want it to get into that area. But we have seen the challenges around the SRA projects in Mumbai. It's a very good concept otherwise. The challenge again is that a lot of these slum guys, they will get an apartment in the slum building, and in Mumbai even a 50 square meter apartment is a lot of capital value. And these guys will resell that apartment at a huge price in the market, and they will start developing another slum in the periphery of the city. So I don't think it's giving any solution from a slum rehabilitation point of view. Maybe partly there is a slum population which is educated and which is understanding that a better need for living, and they are moving to these slum rehabs building. But there is a large component which just own it for a certain period of time, and although the government has created a lot of watertight system that you cannot transfer the registry or the ownership, but within the system they find ways and means of transferring these ownerships and giving it to somebody else. So it's a very good system, I would say, SRAs, but taken with a pinch of salt, that how the developers and the communities is taking it.
Thanks, Parvesh. Running short of time, so we'll try to conclude now. Quick 2-minute comments from each of the panelists in terms of their closure comments on the panel discussion. Start with you.
I didn't get what you...
No, I said we're running short of time. We'll close the panel discussion.
I think you should
now and
ask,
open for-
get into the question answers. It's probably easier to do that.
Okay, so let's get into the question answers, and then we'll come back for the closure comments from the panelists. We need some mics here. There are several hands going up.
There's one hand there also.
I am architect Ashok Goyal. In 1983, I wrote a write-up for your newspaper Economic Times, this is our capital, wherein I mentioned that 40% of the city of Delhi's population is living in slums. When we used to travel by this public transport system, that time it was called Delhi Transport Undertaking, DTU. And this Delhi Jal Board was known as Delhi Water Supply Disposal Undertaking. What Sonali ji said, we are not considering about the services for the service provider. You cannot expect my press wala or mungfali wala to have a lunch or eat burger in McDonald's. Mr. Vishwanathan, he wants to penalize the car users. He says you increase the parking charges. That time, in 1983, we had only 10,000 DTC buses, DTU buses. Now again we have 10,000. It is very easy to penalize people like us, old people. We are talking about Rahagiri, Mr. Nitin was saying something about Rahagiri.
What?
I'm concluding.
No, not concluding.
I'm
What's your
asking some
question?
questions.
Yeah.
I'm asking some questions to these enlightened people.
Yes, sure. Just because we are short of time, that's all. Yeah.
Rahagiri is only for 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Previously, the traffic situation, what was in Dariba or in Chandni Chowk or in the Walled City area, now it is in Sukhdev Vihar or Friends Colony. I want to ask my friends, what solutions you have for that?
So the question is,
Let me answer about this parking question that he asked. I think my thoughts are that it stems from the fact that there's complete chaos on the road because of all the haphazard parking that happens on the street. The idea to penalize the car was not to take the cars away, but more so that to take the cars away from the street wherein there is space for the car otherwise provided for. My experience is that every basement that you see in the commercial projects have sufficient amount of parking available for all the cars that actually are standing on the street. If you were to make those parking charges lesser or negligible, but then charge for the convenience of parking on the street, you'd probably better have better public space because the cars will automatically go in. I mean, I'm actually critical of the fact that the richest cars or the richest people in Gurgaon want to park on the street because the parking is actually free, whereas in the basement it costs you 30 or 40 rupees. So to regain that whole public space, one way to do it is to disincentivize the parking on the street and make it more attractive to park in the basement. So that's one question. The Rahagiri, as I said, yes, it's a 2 hours or a 3 hours event, happens on a weekend. There's also push for this whole car-free day that happens in Gurgaon. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that public transport is the key to everything. And I have seen the city grow from what it was to the metro now. I always said this also in a previous forum. The metro provides for a comfortable, secure, and affordable method of moving from one point to the other. If you actually travel in metro, you would see that the typical Delhi person who's otherwise extremely aggressive and angry at all times does calm down, and the metro with its air-conditioned space does provide you that opportunity for a person to calm down. So there's no doubt that something like the metro has brought in that change in the culture. You get less aggressive.
Thanks, Vishwa. It's a topic on which many of us are passionate. We hold a lot of views. Would request you to just limit yourself to questions. There's a few hands out there. Any mics, please? Just limit yourself to a question so that the panelists can answer.
With this discussion, I come to a conclusion because Gurgaon is an entirely different city and Delhi is entirely different. Delhi is controlled by Delhi Development Authority. All norms and everything is governed by the government. Where in Gurgaon, it is the private builders and developers are doing it, where your concept of designing can be taken care of. But in Delhi, designing concept cannot be held for public domain. Is there any other solution for Delhi?
No,
Delhi,
I sort of don't completely agree with you. It's not that Delhi, every situation has a solution. It is a question of trying to figure out what the parameters are and arrive at the right solution. In Delhi, there is a lot of land, and there is a lot of land which is lying default. Now, if we actually
it is all owned by DDA.
doesn't matter. It is government-owned land, and if it can be consolidated and planned and organized correctly, you will find a lot of space for public activities.
Madam, DDA has got its own town planning department, own architect designing portion. The public participation is not there at all.
If we
So
push
we
for it,
have
it
to
can
come
be there.
forward with a solution that public participation in designing of the open space should be taken care of by the ordinary public also.
Thanks. I think the passions are rising.
No, it's not rising at all.
It's a very live topic, and no, but we are short of time,
See,
and I think
we-
I need to wrap
In
up.
last half an hour, whatever discussion has taken place, it is regarding what is happening in public domain.
Absolutely.
But not the solution for any concept of designing is taken care of. And what is the problem in Delhi is that unless the government norms are being guided by the ordinary public, nothing can be changed in Delhi.
Thanks.
And where in the
Thank
Gurgaon,
you.
it is
Thank
a
you.
private land where the developer and there also Huda has to
You are
introduce the
encroaching
norms
into
in that.
time. No, now you are encroaching into time. Thank you. Sit down. So I'll wrap up. I think.
So just a small question.
Okay, somebody.
So same here.
Sure. So we'll have separate 10 minutes with the panelists. There's one lady there who's got a mic and she just would not take no for an answer.
Hi, I'm Shilpi. I'm an architect, urban designer. So we've
Question.
do you think we've got two contrasting examples in the Indian scenario? We've got the old city of Shahjahanabad and we've got Chandigarh, which is a fairly recent development. Do you think, all of you think, the solution is somewhere in between the two? Because Chandigarh as a public domain is not completely successful, and Shahjahanabad, the only public domain that is there is the street. So what can we do about it? And none of them is actually succeeding right now.
I know. I mean, it's not really a multiple choice. Yes, no, maybe. So anybody
I'd like your views
Just
on
one.
it, sir.
No,
Yeah.
I understand the point. It's a very important point. One of you, not all of you.
It's a you know, it's a very complicated question, and it can't be answered by saying that something in between Shahjahanabad and Chandigarh is the answer. You know, it requires a long debate and workshops after workshops to come up with an ideal answer. So, at least I don't have a straightforward answer for
No, I'll tell you, every context has a different solution. Shahjahanabad is a particular context. It is historical, it has other heritage value, and the solution for Shahjahanabad has to be specific to that. While Chandigarh is a very different situation, and the solutions can never be generalized.
Thank you. It's time for the wrap up. Just a couple of sentences. Usually on public domain, when all is said and done, usually more is said than done. And I hope with this panel discussion, the trend takes a different turn, and I hope in the future we do as much on public domain as we speak. Thank you. Thank you for the participation.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And obviously, the opinions that we saw that were coming from the audience truly made sure that we know it was a very interactive session. Let's put our hands together for all our panelists and, of course, for our moderator. I'd also like to invite on stage Mr. Rishi Kapoor, Sector Head, TCL, BCCL, to join us on stage. And along with Mr. Subramanian, present a memento to each one of our panelists. Of course, the panelists will join us for the rest of the day, so we are more than welcome to take the questions offline. Certificate thanking you to be a part of Smart Green Summit and Awards. Thank you so very much. Let's continue putting our hands together as we present. Thank you, ma'am. A pleasure indeed. Thank you so very much. And as we thank our panelists, I'd also like to request Mr. Kapoor to please present a memento of appreciation to our moderator for holding the session so well. Thank you so very much, sir. And may I request all of you to join us for a group picture. We'd like to capture the moment. Once again, I'd like to inform all of you that the panelists will be here through the day, so you're more than welcome to catch them offline.